That's the galactic plane. Our sun does this every 24,000 years. We are right here now. We are about to go into the northern hemisphere of the Milky Way galaxy. We've been in the south for 12,000 years, and we go 12,000 years in the north. That is what's happening at 2012. The galactic plane looks something like this, and our sun has been traversing that slowly for the last 15 years. We are now around about there, and that's what 2012 is all about. That's all it is. It's an equinoctial crossing. But why aren't the governments of the world preparing a great big party? This only happens once every 24,000 years. Why the silence? Why is there so much silence about this beautiful science that is taking place right now in our lifetime?
Are you saying the first colonists on this planet were the reptilians?
Yes, I'm sorry for diverting from that, but absolutely. The first beings, the first colonies here were reptilians. Therefore, they consider this to be their planet, and that we, humans or mammalians, are the alien invaders. When we would do our work and be projected into other dimensions and realities, we would see this information, especially when we did time travel work, where we could then go back or forward and see exactly what the situation was at any specific time. And time travel really isn't as unusual as people think it is. If you know about science, every point in time and space has a unique vibration or energy. And so they colonized a very large landmass on the planet that appeared out of the oceans, and that is been called in various cultures either Lemuria or Mu. Yeah, and that existed in what is now the Pacific Ocean, and that culture lasted for many, many millennia. And they developed large cities of high technology, and basically were preparing the planet for an assimilation into the Draco Empire.
What year might that have been in terms of our knowledge of time?
That would have been close to about 800,000 BC.
800,000. High technology.
Very high technology. They brought that with them. And now I need to go back into planetary science to explain why humans came here.
Okay, and then how?
Well, yes.
brought Atlantis down was what the mythologies say brought it down, which was a war between the gods, or a conflict between beings that were called the gods, and the kinds of technologies that they were using. This is a motif that you find in the mythologies of the ancient world. The beings who interfered with our history are still around, or at least their descendants are still around, behind the thrones of government. And not only do we have to deal with the existential problem of evil within ourselves, we also have to deal with the social nihilism, the governmental paradigm, right, coming out of the 11th century BC, where the great empires of Sumeria and Babylon rise, and they're based on tyranny, territorialism, suppression of the earth, suppression of women. All the later epochs, all the later empires are based on those paradigms. And then they say in the history books that history just stops at 11,000 years ago, or that's when it begins, right? And we don't know what happened before that. A complete fabrication. Because all the ancient legends have plenty to tell you about what was happening before that.
First, you're in flatland, but you don't know you're in flatland. First, you're a prisoner, but you don't know you're in prison. First, you're in the matrix, but the first step is to find out you're stuck in a matrix. You're stuck in a cube. You're incubating. Well, there's this fun little story. I'm going to show you one more little picture here on the computer screen. This is from the black hole in the Bardo quest in Orion. Here is a picture of part of what would be called a hypercube. Okay? Now, a hypercube is literally the way out of 3 dimensions. It is the map out of flatland. It is the way out of the cube. It is the way out of the matrix. Now, our friend Vincent Bridges, who was studying this language, which became the movie Stargate, which is called Enochian Ophanim. And he was studying the grid structure of this language, and these are the letters. Now, these actual letters became the glyphs used to make the movie Stargate, which is how you squirt live people's DNA magnetics through black holes and into time. And these letters, I believe actually, if we look here, became, if we look over here, here is the origins of Greek based on the Ophanim Enochian alphabet. And here is the origins of the Cherokee bird tribe language based on the same alphabet. And we were just looking today at this rune structure called, what was it called? The Elder Futhark rune. Says, oh, that's the star language of the Adawi, the star elders of the Cherokee, whose mission apparently was shamanically to squirt soul groups, DNA groups, through wormholes into stars. And now, Vincent does this lovely analysis of this alphabet. Let's look again at the picture. And he says the gematria of how the letters are laid out. And he uses the Greek alphabet to interpret the number values. And he says the layout of this alphabet is a hypercube. He says this alphabet is a map to how to squirt magnetism through a hypercube. Now, another way of describing how you would add spin to a cube to make a hypercube is the model of 5 cubes in a dodecahedron, which, if you look at it in another shadowgram, you get this map of perfect implosion. The icosadodeca, which is literally what you see when you superpose DNA, Earth grid, and zodiac, that perfect nest. We have another partial picture over here in this Zoom tool model where we show some of the stellations. We'll take a peek here. This is this little Zoom tool crystal. You see that each of the connecting points is the rhombi icasa, which is really the icosadodeca. And if you stellate these in every which way, you get this perfect nest of golden mean ratio of perfect 3-dimensional fractality, which is implosion, which is the geometry of DNA, Earth grid, and zodiac, was what was called Ezekiel's wheel, city of revelation, and may in fact be the only possible 3-dimensional fractal. And the symmetry might actually be the symmetry of gold's valence shells, and the true map to how to fuse anything. So it's like the symmetry operations in 3D necessary to squirt light into implosion. If we ask any good shaman, and I've asked a few recently, they all tell you that when you come to a black hole, remember that Sham-an comes from Shem-an, which means Shem, to raise the highward fire stone, which is really what the Tower of Babel was, the origins of the true unifying language. which is simply the symmetry operations to climb the tower or the Magdala or the Jed, the raising the Jed of symmetry. And so the Shem-An was the one who knew how to raise the Highward Firestone, which was literally to create a magnetic structure that could squirt genetic memory, the lucid dream, back up into the stars, because otherwise you're stuck inside this egg whose membrane is the speed of light, bliss, tight enough to go through the speed of light. It's the only thing that survives. Well, you say, well, why does this question arrive now? We've been doing fine for 2,000 years, and a whole story about why did we need the juices of this powerful reptilian family, the dragon's egg, planted here in order to get the leverage we needed for the juices up the spine to make the eye tooth that penetrates the dragon's egg that gets us out of the matrix. The membrane of the egg is literally the speed limit of the speed of light, which sets a cocoon around all human activities. You can kind of say, from that perspective, the only thing that ever emerges from the planet is that which can be squeezed using DNA and Gland's bliss tight enough to go through the speed of light. It's the only thing that survives. Well, you say, well, why does this question arrive now? We've been doing fine for 2,000 years, and Anna Hayes and Hall Clementi says it's not 2,000 years, it's 500 million years we've been being messed with by various ET bloodlines.